Blood painted the western sky as the stagecoach careened wildly over the rugged trail, Fiona Valmont clinging desperately to her seat while splinters of wood exploded around her. The sickening crack of a breaking axle signaling the violent end to her 3-week journey across the untamed frontier. The year was 1875, and like countless others before her, she had come west seeking a new beginning, not the terrifying cacophony of splintering wood and screaming horses that now enveloped her world. The stagecoach lurched one final time before toppling onto its side, sending passengers tumbling against each other like discarded rag dolls. When the chaos finally settled, Fiona found herself alone amid the wreckage, the driver and other passengers having staggered away to seek help from the nearest settlement, Superior, Arizona Territory, supposedly just 5 miles ahead. "They'll send help," the driver had promised before limping away with the others. "Just stay with the coach, miss. This territory ain't safe for a lady alone." But as minutes stretched into hours and the unforgiving desert sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in deepening hues of orange and crimson, Fiona's composure finally crumbled. Tears streamed down her dust-covered cheeks as she surveyed her meager possessions scattered among the wreckage. Her carefully planned future suddenly seemed as broken as the stagecoach that had carried her west from Boston. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered through her sobs. It wasn't until a shadow fell across her that she looked up, startled to find herself staring into the weathered face of a stranger. He sat atop a chestnut Mustang, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dying light. The stranger's face was partially obscured by the brim of his worn Stetson, but his eyes, piercing blue against sun-bronzed skin, studied her with undisguised curiosity. "Looks like you've had yourself quite a day, madam," he observed, his voice carrying the rough texture of a man accustomed to long silences. Fiona hastily wiped at her tears, embarrassment flooding her cheeks. The axle broke. The others went ahead for help, but that was hours ago. The stranger dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the saddle. As he approached, she could see him more clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that spoke of hard years under relentless suns. He wasn't handsome in the refined way of Boston gentlemen, but something in his steady gaze made her breath catch. "Name's Fletcher Norwood," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of politeness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "I ranch about 15 miles north of here." "Fiona Valmont," she replied, attempting to smooth her rumpled traveling dress. "I was bound for Superior." Fletcher crouched beside the broken coach, examining the splintered axle with a practiced eye. "This coach isn't going anywhere." He straightened, replacing his hat. "The journey ends here if you want. I can take you back to my ranch for the night, get you to Superior tomorrow, or we can make camp and wait for that help that may or may not be coming." Fiona hesitated, weighing her limited options. The thought of spending the night alone in the desert terrified her, but placing her trust in a stranger carried its own risks. Still, something in Fletcher Norwood's steady gaze suggested reliability. "Why would the journey end here?" she asked, confusion momentarily overtaking her distress. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Because sometimes, madam, the place where things break down is exactly where you're meant to be." He extended a calloused hand toward her. "So what'll it be? End the journey here and come with me, or keep waiting for help that might not arrive before nightfall?" The desert twilight deepened around them as Fiona made her decision, unaware that this moment, this broken stagecoach, and this taciturn cowboy would alter the course of her life forever. "I'll go with you, Mr. Norwood," she said, placing her hand in his. Fletcher nodded once, then began gathering her scattered belongings. What brings a Boston lady to Arizona territory? Superior's barely more than a mining camp with delusions of becoming a proper town. Fiona watched him work, surprised by his perceptiveness. How did you know I'm from Boston? Your accent, he replied simply. And those shoes weren't made for desert walking. She glanced down at her once fine leather boots, now scuffed and coated with a layer of reddish dust. I'm to be the new schoolteacher in Superior. They advertised back east for educated women willing to teach in frontier towns. Fletcher secured her trunk to his horse with practiced efficiency. Superior's been trying to civilize itself. Last teacher lasted 3 months before heading back east. He offered a hand to help her mount. Hope you've got more grit than she did. Fiona settled awkwardly behind the saddle, uncertain where to place her hands until Fletcher guided them around his waist. I have nowhere to go back to, Mr. Norwood. I intend to succeed here. He made a sound that might have been approval before urging his horse forward. Then you might just make it after all, Miss Valmont. As they rode away from the broken stagecoach, Fiona couldn't help wondering what she had gotten herself into. The vast openness of the territory stretched around them, beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. The last rays of sunlight painted the distant mountains in purple shadow as night prepared to claim the land. It's another hour to my place, Fletcher said over his shoulder. Not much to look at, but it's solid. Fiona nodded against his back, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. The events of the day, the crash, the waiting, the unexpected rescue had drained what little energy she had left after weeks of travel. You can rest, he added, sensing her fatigue. I won't let you fall. Though she hardly knew this man, Fiona found herself believing him. She allowed her forehead to rest lightly against his back, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. Before long, her eyes grew heavy. She must have dozed, for the next thing she knew, Fletcher was gently shaking her awake. We're here, Miss Valmont. Blinking sleepily, Fiona straightened and looked around. In the gathering darkness, she could make out the silhouette of a modest ranch house, a barn, and several outbuildings. Lantern lights spilled from the main house's windows, casting warm rectangles on the ground outside. You have family? She asked, suddenly wondering what kind of situation she had agreed to enter. Just me and my ranch hand, Miguel, Fletcher replied, dismounting before helping her down. He and his wife, Consuela, live in the smaller house yonder. She helps keep things in order around here. Relief washed over Fiona. The presence of another woman made the situation feel less improper. As if summoned by their arrival, the front door opened and a stout Mexican woman stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Senor Fletcher, we were beginning to worry. Her eyes widened at the sight of Fiona. And who is this? Consuela, this is Miss Valmont, Fletcher explained, leading his horse toward the barn. Her stagecoach broke down on the Superior Road. She'll be staying with us tonight. Consuela immediately bustled forward, her face warm with concern. Pobrecita, you must be exhausted. Come inside, come inside. I have stew keeping warm. Before Fiona could protest, she found herself ushered into the ranch house. The interior was simple but surprisingly comfortable, solid wooden furniture, a stone fireplace, and shelves lined with books that suggested Fletcher Norwood was more than just the rugged cowboy he appeared to be. Sit, sit, Consuela insisted, guiding Fiona to a chair at the sturdy oak table. You are too thin. All you American ladies want to squeeze yourselves so small. Not healthy. A smile touched Fiona's lips for the first time that day. There was something comforting about Consuela's motherly fussing after weeks of being alone. Fletcher entered a few minutes later, having seen to his horse. He'd removed his hat and gun belt, revealing dark hair streaked with hints of premature silver at the temples. Without the shadow of his hat brim, his face appeared younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 35 at most. "Miguel will bring your trunk in shortly," he told her, taking a seat across the table. "I hope you don't mind staying here tonight. We don't have much in the way of luxuries, but it's clean and safe." "You've been more than kind," Fiona assured him, accepting the bowl of fragrant stew Consuela placed before her. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Fletcher's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes softened. "No one should be left stranded in this country. The desert doesn't forgive carelessness." They ate in companionable silence, Fiona suddenly ravenous after the day's ordeal. The stew was rich and flavorful, unlike anything she'd tasted during her journey west. "This is delicious," she told Consuela, who beamed with pleasure. "Senor Fletcher raises the best cattle in the territory," the woman proclaimed proudly. "Good meat makes good stew." After the meal, while Consuela cleared the table, Fletcher poured 2 small glasses of amber liquid and offered one to Fiona. "It's been a difficult day. This might help you sleep." Fiona hesitated. Ladies in Boston didn't drink whiskey, but she wasn't in Boston anymore. She accepted the glass, taking a tentative sip. The liquor burned a path down her throat, but the warmth that followed was not unpleasant. "Tomorrow I'll take you into Superior," Fletcher said, his voice low and measured. "The schoolhouse has living quarters attached." "Simple but functional from what I've heard." Fiona nodded, studying him over the rim of her glass. "You know Superior well." "Well enough. I drive cattle there sometimes, pick up supplies." He rolled the whiskey in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the firelight. "It's growing. The mines brought in more families. That's why they need a teacher, I suppose." "And you?" Fiona asked, curiosity overcoming her usual reserve. "Have you always been here?" A shadow crossed his features. "Came west after the war, like a lot of men who couldn't find their place back home." The war between the states. Fiona noticed how he didn't specify which side he'd fought for, and she didn't ask. Those wounds were still fresh for many. Even 10 years later, Consuela returned, breaking the moment of contemplation between them. "The guest room is ready, señorita. I've put out fresh towels and filled the wash basin." Grateful for the woman's thoughtfulness, Fiona rose from the table. "Thank you both for your kindness. I'm afraid I've imposed terribly." Fletcher stood as well, a gesture of gentlemanly courtesy that again surprised her. "No imposition, Miss Valmont. These parts can be hard on newcomers. Folks need to look out for each other. Even so, I'm in your debt." She hesitated, then offered her hand. "Good night, Mr. Norwood." His large hand enveloped hers briefly, warm and calloused from years of ranch work. "Fletcher. Out here, folks don't stand much on formality." "Then you must call me Fiona," she replied with a small smile. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper she couldn't name. "Good night, Fiona. Sleep well." Following Consuela down a short hallway, Fiona found herself shown to a simple but clean bedroom. Her trunk had already been delivered and stood at the foot of the iron-framed bed. "If you need anything, señorita, my husband and I are in the cottage nearby," Consuela told her. "Señor Fletcher is across the hall." Once alone, Fiona sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. She had left Boston with such clear plans: arrive in Superior, establish herself as the town's teacher, build a new life far from painful memories. Now here she was, in a stranger's home, her future once again uncertain. Yet as she washed the dust from her face and changed into her nightgown, Fiona found herself less afraid than she might have expected. There was something about Fletcher Norwood that inspired confidence, despite his reserved manner. Sleep claimed her quickly that night, the soft sounds of the desert night filtering through the open window, distant coyotes, the rustle of wind through scrub brush, and somewhere nearby, the low, gentle notes of someone playing a harmonica with surprising skill. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the window and the aroma of coffee and frying bacon. Fiona dressed hurriedly in one of her simpler dresses, painfully aware that her travel-worn appearance was far from presentable. She pinned her chestnut hair into a modest bun and splashed water on her face before making her way to the kitchen. Fletcher sat at the table, reading what appeared to be a week-old newspaper. He rose when she entered, that same ingrained courtesy evident in his posture. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Fiona admitted, accepting the cup of coffee Consuela immediately pressed into her hands. "I can't thank you enough for your hospitality." Fletcher nodded, resuming his seat. "We'll head to Superior after breakfast. Should take about 2 hours with the wagon." "Wagon?" Fiona questioned. "Can't expect you to ride pillion all that way," he explained. "Besides, we need to bring your trunk." The practicality of his thinking made Fiona smile. "Of course." "I wasn't thinking clearly." Breakfast passed pleasantly, with Consuela fussing over Fiona's appetite and Miguel joining them briefly before heading out to tend to the morning chores. The ranch hand was as quiet as his employer but had kind eyes and a respectful manner that put Fiona at ease. By mid-morning, Fletcher had the wagon loaded and ready. Fiona's trunk was secured in the back, along with several crates that he explained contained supplies he needed to deliver to the general store in Superior. "Always try to make every trip count," he told her as he helped her onto the wooden seat. "Waste of time otherwise." The journey to Superior took them through breathtaking country, vast expanses of desert, punctuated by dramatic rock formations and dotted with cacti and scrub brush. Despite the harshness of the landscape, Fiona found herself captivated by its stark beauty. "It's nothing like Massachusetts," she remarked as they wound their way through a narrow pass between towering cliffs. Fletcher glanced at her, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Most folks either love it or hate it, not much middle ground when it comes to desert living." "And you?" she asked. "Do you love it?" He was silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. "It's honest country, doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Demands respect, but rewards those who understand it." He adjusted the reins slightly. "Yes, I suppose I do love it, though I never thought of it in those terms before." Something in his response resonated with Fiona. She had come west seeking not just employment but honesty, a place where she could rebuild her life without pretense or painful reminders. "I think I might come to love it too," she said softly. Fletcher gave her a considering look, but said nothing more on the subject. Instead, he began pointing out landmarks, naming distant mountain ranges, and occasionally sharing brief stories about the area's history, Apache raids from years past. The discovery of copper that had transformed Superior from a collection of tents to a growing settlement. As they approached Superior, Fiona's nervousness returned. The town was larger than she had imagined from the correspondence, perhaps 200 buildings ranging from substantial brick structures to humble wooden shacks. The streets bustled with activity, miners heading to and from shifts, women shopping or carrying water, children darting between buildings in improvised games. "Main Street," Fletcher announced as they turned onto a wide dirt thoroughfare lined with hitching posts. "General store, saloon, assayer's office." He nodded toward a white wooden building with a small bell tower. "And that'll be your schoolhouse, I reckon." Fiona's heart quickened at the sight of it. Simple but sturdy, with a small fenced yard and what appeared to be living quarters attached to the rear. It looked remarkably similar to the description in the town council's letter. Fletcher guided the wagon to a stop in front of a brick building marked Superior Mercantile and General Goods. A balding man in a flour-dusted apron stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk, his face breaking into a smile at the sight of them. Fletcher Norwood, right on time with those supplies, I see. His gaze shifted to Fiona, curiosity evident in his expression. Frank, Fletcher acknowledged with a nod. This is Miss Fiona Valmont, your new schoolteacher. Her stagecoach had an accident yesterday about 15 miles out. Axle broke clean through. The shopkeeper's eyes widened. Good heavens! We'd about given up hope when the driver and other passengers arrived yesterday evening. Said they'd left a lady with the coach and were sending help back. The rescue party must have missed you. Mr. Norwood found me before they arrived, Fiona explained, accepting Fletcher's hand as he helped her down from the wagon. He was kind enough to offer shelter for the night. Frank beamed, extending his hand to Fiona. Frank Tillman, miss. I serve on the town council that hired you. Welcome to Superior, Arizona Territory. We're mighty pleased you made it safely despite the troubles. Fiona shook his hand, relieved by the warm welcome. Thank you, Mr. Tillman. I'm eager to begin my duties. Well now, let's get you settled first, Frank insisted. The schoolhouse has been made ready, but I expect you'll want to rest after your ordeal. He turned to Fletcher. Much obliged to you for bringing her to town, Fletcher. Don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Fletcher had already begun unloading crates from the wagon, just happened to be riding that way. He paused, glancing at Fiona. Where would you like her trunk delivered? Oh, yes, of course. Frank gestured down the street. If you'll bring the lady's belongings to the schoolhouse, I'll take her there myself and make introductions to Mrs. Hollister. She's been keeping things in order, waiting for the new teacher's arrival. Within minutes, Fiona found herself walking alongside Frank Tillman toward her new home and workplace, with Fletcher following behind with her trunk balanced easily on one shoulder. The short journey drew curious glances from townspeople, several of whom called out greetings to Frank or nodded respectfully to Fletcher. The schoolhouse proved even more charming up close, freshly whitewashed with blue-painted shutters, and a small bell tower that would summon students to class. A neat path led around to the attached living quarters, which consisted of 4 rooms, a sitting room, kitchen, bedroom, and a small study. Mrs. Hollister, a plump, energetic woman in her 50s, met them at the door with effusive welcomes. Oh, we were so worried when we heard about the accident. But here you are, safe and sound. The good Lord was watching over you, sending Mr. Norwood your way. Fiona smiled politely, though the mention of divine intervention touched a sore spot in her faith that had developed over recent years. Yes, I was very fortunate. Mrs. Hollister continued chattering as she showed Fiona through the rooms, pointing out the improvements made in anticipation of her arrival: new curtains sewn by the Ladies' Aid Society, a small bookshelf built by the carpenter's son, a stocked pantry contributed by various town families. Fletcher set her trunk down in the bedroom, his tall frame making the small room seem even more compact. Where would you like this? By the window, if you please, Fiona directed, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the confined space. Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the strange circumstances that had brought them together. Well, Fletcher said, straightening and breaking the moment, I should get back to my deliveries. Fiona followed him to the front door, leaving Mrs. Hollister exclaiming over the state of the kitchen stove. Outside on the small porch, away from curious ears, she spoke softly. I don't know how to thank you properly, Mr. Fletcher. You very likely saved my life. He shook his head, adjusting his hat brim against the midday sun. Anyone would have done the same. We both know that's not true, Fiona countered. Most men would have continued on their way, or she stopped, not wanting to contemplate darker alternatives for a woman alone in such territory. Fletcher's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes softened. "You're safe now, that's what matters." Fiona hesitated, then impulsively extended her hand. "Will you? That is, might I see you again, to properly express my gratitude, perhaps?" His calloused fingers closed gently around hers. "Superior's not so big that we won't cross paths. I come to town every few weeks for supplies." It wasn't exactly the response she'd hoped for, but Fiona nodded, withdrawing her hand. "Then I'll look forward to those occasions. Good day, Fletcher." He touched the brim of his hat in a silent farewell, then turned and walked back toward the mercantile, his long strides eating up the distance. Fiona watched him go, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. Gratitude, certainly, but also something else she wasn't ready to examine too closely. "Such a taciturn man," Mrs. Hollister commented, appearing beside Fiona. "Been that way since he came to these parts after the war. Keeps to himself mostly, though he's always first to help when there's trouble." She patted Fiona's arm. "Come inside, dear. You must be exhausted. We've time for a proper cup of tea before meeting the rest of the town council." The next several days passed in a whirlwind of introductions, preparations, and adjustments to her new life. Superior, Fiona discovered, was a community in transition, part rough mining camp, part aspiring town with genuine ambitions for respectability. The copper mine employed most of the men, while their wives maintained homes under challenging frontier conditions, determined to create a proper community for their children. The school roster consisted of 28 pupils ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, with varying levels of previous education. Some of the older boys had never attended school before, their families having only recently decided that education might offer better prospects than immediate employment in the dangerous mines. Fiona threw herself into preparing lesson plans, organizing the schoolroom, and making home visits to meet her future students and their parents. The work was exhausting but fulfilling, leaving her little time to dwell on the circumstances of her arrival or the enigmatic rancher who had come to her rescue. Yet in quiet moments late at night, when the town fell silent save for occasional bursts of laughter from the saloon, or early mornings, as she watched the desert sunrise paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Fiona found her thoughts returning to Fletcher Norwood. Something about his quiet strength and unexpected kindness had left an impression deeper than mere gratitude could explain. 3 weeks after her arrival, as Fiona was dismissing her students at the end of their first full week of classes, she looked up to find a familiar figure leaning against the schoolyard fence. Fletcher stood watching the children disperse, his expression unreadable beneath his hat brim. Her heart quickened as she approached him, smoothing her skirts self-consciously. "Fletcher, what a pleasant surprise." He straightened at her approach, removing his hat. "Fiona, thought I'd see how you're settling in." "Very well, thank you," she gestured toward the departing children. "We've just completed our first week of classes. The children are bright and eager to learn for the most part." Fletcher nodded, his eyes following a group of boys racing down the street. "Good. Town needs educated young folks." He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I brought something for your school, if you could use it." Only then did Fiona notice the burlap-wrapped parcel leaning against the fence. Fletcher reached for it, unwrapping the covering to reveal a wall map of the United States, mounted on wooden rollers. "Found it in Tucson last week," he explained. "Thought your students might benefit from seeing where they fit in the bigger picture." Fiona stared at the gift, touched beyond measure by the thoughtfulness behind it. "Fletcher, it's perfect." We've been making do with my rough drawings on the blackboard. The children will be thrilled." A hint of color touched his tanned cheeks. "It's nothing fancy." "It's incredibly generous," Fiona insisted. She reached out impulsively and touched his arm. "Would you? Would you like to see the schoolroom? Where it will hang?" Something flickered in his eyes, hesitation perhaps, or surprise at the invitation. Then he nodded, tucking the map under one arm. "Lead the way." Inside the schoolhouse, Fiona watched as Fletcher hung the map on the nail she indicated above the blackboard. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows caught the silver threads in his dark hair as he worked, and Fiona found herself studying his profile, the straight nose, firm jaw, and the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against desert suns. "There," he said, stepping back to check that the map hung evenly. "Should hold well enough." "It's perfect," Fiona repeated, standing beside him to admire the addition to her classroom. "The children are studying geography this term. This will make such a difference in their understanding." Fletcher glanced down at her, a rare smile softening his features. "Glad to be of help." They stood there a moment longer than strictly necessary, the air between them charged with unspoken awareness. Fiona became acutely conscious of how close they were standing, of the faint scent of leather and sage that clung to his clothes, of the warmth radiating from his tall frame. She cleared her throat and took a small step back. "Have you had dinner, Mrs.? Hollister brought me a chicken pie this morning that's far too large for one person. I was just about to warm it." Fletcher hesitated, his expression carefully neutral. "Wouldn't want to impose." "It's hardly an imposition to share a meal with a friend," Fiona countered, surprising herself with her boldness. "Consider it small repayment for this wonderful gift and for saving me from a night alone in the desert." After what seemed an eternity, he nodded. "Reckon I could eat." Fiona led him through to her living quarters, suddenly seeing the modest rooms through his eyes, the small touches she'd added to make the space her own. The books stacked on every available surface, the vase of desert wildflowers on the table. "It's not much," she said, removing her teaching apron and hanging it on a peg, "but it's become home more quickly than I expected." "It suits you," Fletcher observed, setting his hat on the rack by the door. Something about seeing his hat hanging there, as if it belonged, sent an unexpected flutter through Fiona's chest. She busied herself with lighting the stove and preparing their simple meal, grateful for the distraction. Conversation came more easily than she had anticipated. Fletcher asked thoughtful questions about her students and the curriculum, while Fiona found herself genuinely interested in his descriptions of ranch life and the challenges of raising cattle in desert country. By unspoken mutual agreement, they avoided more personal topics, focusing instead on the present rather than the pasts that had brought them to this territory. As they finished their meal, Fletcher leaned back in his chair, more relaxed than she had yet seen him. "You're doing good work here, Fiona. These children are fortunate," she smiled, warmed by the genuine approval in his voice. "I hope so. Many of them have had such limited opportunities until now." "Like you were saying about the Miller boy," Fletcher began, only to be interrupted by an urgent knocking at the door. Fiona rose to answer it, finding a breathless young boy on her doorstep. "Miss Valmont, Pa says to fetch Mr. Norwood if he's still here. There's trouble at the saloon. One of the miners is threatening to shoot up the place." Fletcher was already on his feet, reaching for his hat. "Tell your pa I'm coming, son." The boy nodded and darted away, leaving Fiona staring after him in concern. "Should I stay here?" Fletcher instructed firmly, checking the revolver at his hip. "This isn't something you should be anywhere near." Fiona followed him to the door, anxiety creasing her brow. "Be careful, Fletcher. He paused on the threshold, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "Lock the door behind me. I'll come back when it's settled, let you know all's well." After he left, Fiona paced her small sitting room, listening intently for sounds of commotion from the direction of the saloon 3 blocks away. The evening stretched interminably as she waited, her mind conjuring increasingly worrisome scenarios. Nearly 2 hours passed before a gentle knock sounded at her door. Fiona rushed to open it, relief washing over her at the sight of Fletcher standing there, seemingly unharmed. "Everything's settled," he told her, his voice weary but steady. "Minor had too much whiskey and a grudge against the foreman. Sheriff's got him sleeping it off in the jail." Fiona stepped back, inviting him in. "Were you hurt? There was so much time. Had to help sort things out, give a statement to the sheriff." Fletcher removed his hat again but remained standing near the door. "Didn't mean to worry you." "I was concerned," Fiona admitted, unable to disguise the emotion in her voice. "When you didn't return quickly, I feared the worst." Something shifted in Fletcher's expression, then a softening around the eyes, a subtle change that transformed his entire countenance. "Been a long while since anyone worried over my welfare." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity or elaboration, squeezed at Fiona's heart. On impulse, she stepped forward and laid her hand gently on his arm. "Well, someone does now." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken yet powerful passing between them. Fletcher's gaze dropped briefly to her lips before he took a deliberate step back, breaking the connection. "It's getting late," he said, his voice rougher than before. "I should go. Have an early start tomorrow." Disappointment washed through Fiona, though she knew his withdrawal was proper expected even. They barely knew each other, and her position as the town's teacher demanded irreproachable conduct. "Of course," she agreed, stepping back to a more appropriate distance. "Thank you again for the map. The children will be thrilled on Monday." Fletcher nodded, replacing his hat. "I'm headed back to the ranch tomorrow, but I'll be in town again in a couple of weeks. If you need anything before then, Frank Tillman knows how to reach me." "I'll remember that." Fiona hesitated, then added softly, "Good night, Fletcher." "Good night, Fiona." He touched the brim of his hat in that now familiar gesture before stepping out into the night. Fiona watched from her doorway as he walked away, his figure gradually dissolving into the darkness. Only when he had completely disappeared from view did she close and lock her door, pressing her back against it as unfamiliar emotions swirled within her. What was happening to her? She had come west to escape painful memories and build a new life centered around her teaching not to develop feelings for a taciturn rancher who clearly carried his own share of secrets and sorrows. Yet there was something about Fletcher Norwood that called to her, something beyond his obvious physical appeal or the debt of gratitude she owed him. Shaking her head at her own foolishness, Fiona began clearing away the dinner dishes. Fletcher had been kind to her, nothing more. Any suggestion of deeper feelings was surely a product of her imagination and the romantic notions that had led her to disappointment once before. Still, as she prepared for bed that night, Fiona couldn't help wondering when she might see him again, and what the future might hold for 2 wounded souls in this harsh but beautiful territory. True to his word, Fletcher returned to Superior 2 weeks later. Fiona spotted him outside the Mercantile as she was walking her youngest students back from a nature study excursion. Her heart quickened at the sight of him conversing with Frank Tillman, his tall frame unmistakable even at a distance. "Children," she said to her charges, "let's practice our observation skills. What do you notice about the 2 men standing outside the Mercantile?" Little Sarah Peterson squinted in the bright sunlight. "One's Mr. Tillman from the store, and the other's real tall with a brown horse." His horse has a white star on its forehead, added 8-year-old Thomas Wilson, and the tall man has a gun on his hip. Very observant, Fiona praised them. That gentleman is Mr. Norwood. He's a rancher who lives north of town. He donated our beautiful map of the United States. My pa says Mr. Norwood fought in the war and is the best shot in 3 counties, declared James Miller importantly. Fiona gently redirected the conversation. People are more than the stories told about them, James. Now, let's continue to the schoolhouse. You all have arithmetic to complete before dismissal. As they passed the mercantile, Fletcher looked up, his gaze finding hers. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly in what Fiona had come to recognize as his version of a smile. She returned the gesture with a nod and a warm smile of her own, hoping the flush she felt rising in her cheeks wasn't visible from a distance. Later that afternoon, after dismissing her students, Fiona was erasing the blackboard when a knock at the schoolhouse door announced a visitor. She turned to find Fletcher standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his deep voice sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "Not at all," she assured him, setting down the eraser and brushing chalk dust from her hands. "I was just finishing for the day." Fletcher stepped inside, his gaze taking in the classroom with its rows of desks, student artwork on the walls, and his map prominently displayed. "Place looks different with all the children's work up." "They're making it their own," Fiona agreed, pleased by his observation. "The map has been invaluable. We've been studying the Western Territories this month," he nodded, a hint of satisfaction crossing his features. "Good." He hesitated, then added, "I was wondering if you might join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant to celebrate your first month of teaching." Fiona stared at him in surprise, her heart suddenly racing. "Dinner at the hotel, if that would be appropriate," Fletcher added quickly. "Being a new teacher in town, I understand you need to be mindful of appearances." The consideration touched her deeply. "That's very thoughtful, but yes, the hotel dining room would be perfectly acceptable." She glanced down at her plain work dress, smudged with chalk. "Would you mind terribly if I changed first?" Fletcher's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Course not. Shall I call for you at 6? 6 would be perfect," Fiona agreed, trying to contain the flutter of excitement in her chest. "I'll be ready." After he left, Fiona hurried to her quarters, mind racing as she contemplated her limited wardrobe. She finally settled on her best dress, a forest green poplin with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs. It wasn't fashionable by Boston standards, but it was the finest she owned and brought out the green flecks in her hazel eyes. She bathed quickly, pinned her chestnut hair into a more elaborate style than her usual teaching bun, and even dabbed a tiny amount of rose water at her wrists and throat, a luxury she rarely allowed herself. Precisely at 6 o'clock, a knock sounded at her door. Fiona took a deep breath, checked her appearance one final time in the small mirror, and went to answer it. Fletcher stood on her doorstep, hat in hand. He'd clearly made efforts with his own appearance. His dark hair was neatly combed, his shirt crisp and white beneath a well-worn but clean black vest. He'd even added a simple bolo tie, the silver clasp catching the evening light. His eyes widened slightly as they took her in, a flash of appreciation crossing his features before his usual reserve reasserted itself. "You look lovely, Fiona." The simple compliment warmed her more than the most flowery praise might have done. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." He offered his arm, and Fiona took it, acutely conscious of the firm muscle beneath his sleeve as he escorted her down the street toward the Superior Hotel. Several townspeople nodded greetings as they passed, their curious glances suggesting that this development would fuel gossip for days to come. Fiona found she didn't mind as much as propriety suggested she should. The hotel restaurant was Superior's finest dining establishment, which wasn't saying much by Eastern standards, but represented the town's aspirations toward civilization. White tablecloths, actual glass window panes, and a menu that extended beyond the usual frontier fare of beans and beef made it a special occasion destination for the town's more prosperous citizens. Fletcher secured them a table near the window, holding Fiona's chair with a courtesy that again surprised her, given his rugged exterior. As they settled in, Fiona noticed several curious glances from other diners, including Frank Tillman and his wife at a nearby table. "People are staring," she murmured, unfolding her napkin. Fletcher's expression remained impassive. "Let them. Nothing improper about two acquaintances sharing a meal." The way he said acquaintances sent a peculiar pang through Fiona's chest. Was that all they were to each other? After he had rescued her, after the evening they'd shared over chicken pie, after the unspoken something that seemed to pulse between them whenever their eyes met, the waiter arrived with menus, breaking her train of thought. Dinner progressed pleasantly, the food surprisingly good for a frontier establishment. Fletcher proved to be an attentive dining companion, asking thoughtful questions about her teaching and sharing anecdotes about ranch life that occasionally revealed glimpses of dry humor beneath his reserved exterior. "How did you come to ranching?" Fiona asked as they waited for dessert. "Were you raised to it?" A shadow crossed Fletcher's face. "No, my father was a lawyer in Virginia. I was studying to follow in his footsteps when the war broke out." It was the first concrete detail he'd shared about his past. Fiona treaded carefully, sensing the weight of unspoken history. "And afterward," Fletcher's fingers traced the rim of his water glass. "Afterward, nothing was the same. Couldn't go back to that life. Headed west like so many others, worked cattle drives in Texas, then drifted to Arizona Territory." His eyes met hers briefly. "Found I preferred the company of cattle to most people. They don't ask questions about which side you fought for." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Fiona understood then he had fought for the Confederacy, a fact that still carried stigma in many parts of the country, even a decade after the war's end. "The war asked too much of too many," she said softly. "On both sides." Something in Fletcher's expression eased as if a weight had lifted slightly. "Yes, it did." He paused, then asked, "What brought you west, Fiona? Truth this time, not just the schoolteacher position." Fiona hesitated, surprised by the direct question. "I told you the truth. I came for the teaching position." "But there are schools in Massachusetts," Fletcher countered gently. "Why travel so far from home? Most women don't cross the country alone unless they're running towards something or away from it." The perceptiveness of his observation struck Fiona silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Perhaps both. I lost someone. My fiancé, Richard. Typhoid 2 years ago." She twisted the napkin in her lap. "Afterward, everything in Boston reminded me of him. Every street, every park, every social gathering, I needed space, distance." Fletcher nodded, understanding in his eyes. "So you came to the place most distant from your memories." "Yes," Fiona managed a small smile. "Though I didn't anticipate quite so much distance or difficulty in the journey itself." "Sometimes the hardest journeys lead us where we need to be," Fletcher observed. Then, with a gentleness that touched her deeply, he added, "I'm sorry about your fiancé." "Thank you." Fiona took a deep breath, determined to move the conversation to lighter ground. "But that's enough about sad histories. Tell me about your ranch. You seem to truly love it there." Fletcher accepted the change of subject gracefully. "It's not much compared to some spreads, but it's mine." Built most of it with my own hands. Started with 20 head of cattle and worked up to nearly 300 now. As he described his land and the seasonal rhythms of ranch work, Fiona found herself captivated not just by the content of his words, but by the man himself, the quiet passion that emerged when he spoke of things that mattered to him, the intelligence behind his practical knowledge, the flashes of tenderness when he mentioned the orphaned calf he was hand-raising or the wild horses he sometimes observed in the hills near his property. By the time they finished their apple pie and coffee, Fiona felt she had glimpsed the true Fletcher Norwood behind the taciturn exterior. He presented to the world a man of depth, principle, and unexpected sensitivity. When he escorted her home through streets silvered by moonlight, Fiona was acutely aware of his solid presence beside her, of the careful distance he maintained between them despite the growing connection she felt. At her door, he paused, hat in hand. "Thank you for joining me tonight," he said formally, though his eyes held warmth that belied the stiffness of his words. "I enjoyed every minute," Fiona replied honestly. "Will you be in town tomorrow as well?" Fletcher nodded. "Until midday. Have some business with the blacksmith in the morning." Emboldened by the success of their evening, Fiona asked, "Would you like to come for breakfast? Nothing fancy, but I make decent biscuits." A genuine smile transformed his face, making him look younger and unburdened. "I'd like that very much. 8 o'clock. I'll be here." He hesitated, then reached for her hand, enfolding it briefly in his larger one. "Good night, Fiona." "Good night, Fletcher." She watched him walk away, her hand still tingling from his touch, before finally turning to enter her quarters. As she prepared for bed that night, Fiona found herself humming softly something she hadn't done since before Richard's death. The realization brought her up short. Was she ready for these feelings that Fletcher Norwood seemed to be awakening in her? Was it disloyal to Richard's memory to find her heart responding to another man? Yet as she drifted toward sleep, Fiona couldn't help but think that perhaps this was why she had been drawn west, not just to escape painful memories, but to discover new possibilities, to find that her capacity for joy and connection remained intact despite her losses. The broken stagecoach that had seemed such a disaster might have been the very thing that set her on the path to healing. Breakfast the next morning exceeded Fiona's expectations. Fletcher arrived promptly at 8, bearing a small bouquet of desert wildflowers that he presented with endearing awkwardness. "Thought these might brighten your table," he said, the faintest flush visible beneath his tan. Fiona accepted them with genuine delight. "They're beautiful, Fletcher." "Thank you." She arranged the colorful blooms in a simple glass jar while Fletcher hung his hat and took a seat at her small kitchen table. There was something deeply satisfying about his presence in her home, about the domestic tableau they created together. Conversation flowed easily as they shared the simple meal of biscuits, eggs, and coffee. Fletcher described his plans to expand his herd, while Fiona told him about the reading competition she had organized to motivate her students. When their hands accidentally brushed as they both reached for the jam jar, neither pulled away immediately, the brief contact sending warmth through Fiona's veins. All too soon, Fletcher glanced at the pocket watch he carried and announced reluctantly that he needed to see the blacksmith before heading back to his ranch. "When will you return to town?" Fiona asked, walking him to the door. Fletcher considered. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Depends on how calving season goes. The thought of not seeing him for so long created an unexpected ache in Fiona's chest. "Well, I hope all goes well with your calves." Fletcher paused at the threshold, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Fiona, I've been wondering. Would you consider visiting the ranch sometime? On a Saturday, perhaps, when you don't have school. Consuela mentioned she'd enjoy meeting you properly. The invitation took Fiona by surprise. Visit the ranch. I'd love to, but how would I get there? It's 15 miles, you said. I could come fetch you, Fletcher offered, or arrange for Miguel to bring the wagon if I can't get away. The idea of seeing where Fletcher lived, of learning more about the life he had built, appealed strongly to Fiona. Yes, I would like that very much. Perhaps in 2 weeks. That would give me time to prepare lessons in advance. A rare, full smile lit Fletcher's features. 2 weeks, then. I'll send word when the arrangements are settled. After he left, Fiona found herself moving through her morning tasks with a lightness of spirit that had been absent for too long. Something was happening between them, something tentative and unspoken, but undeniably real. The prospect both thrilled and frightened her. The following 2 weeks seemed interminable to Fiona. She threw herself into her teaching with renewed energy, introduced new projects to engage her students, and even joined the Ladies' Aid Society's weekly sewing circle, all in an effort to keep her thoughts from constantly drifting to Fletcher Norwood and their upcoming visit. Her efforts at distraction were only partially successful. Each night, alone in her quarters, she found herself wondering what Fletcher was doing at that moment, whether he was thinking of her as she was thinking of him, what the future might hold for two people from such different worlds. Precisely 14 days after their breakfast, a message arrived via Frank Tillman's son. Fletcher would send Miguel with the wagon on Saturday morning to bring her to the ranch, returning her to town before nightfall. Fiona spent Friday evening selecting her most practical dress for the visit, baking a loaf of spice cake to bring as a gift for Consuela, and trying to calm the butterflies that seemed to have taken up permanent residence in her stomach. Saturday dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the journey. Miguel arrived promptly at 8, greeting Fiona with shy politeness as he helped her into the wagon. "Senor Fletcher has been preparing all week for your visit, senorita," he confided as they left the town behind. Consuela says she has never seen him so particular about everything being just right. The information sent a pleasant warmth through Fiona. "I've been looking forward to it myself. It will be nice to see the ranch in daylight. I saw very little when I first arrived." The journey passed pleasantly, with Miguel pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about life at the ranch. Fiona found herself increasingly eager to arrive as the familiar landscape from that fateful night came into view. When they finally crested a small rise, the ranch spread before them, larger and more impressive than Fiona had realized in the darkness of her first visit. The main house, built of adobe and timber, sat nestled against a backdrop of rocky hills. Several outbuildings, corrals, and fenced pastures completed the picture of a well-established, prosperous operation. Fletcher emerged from the barn as they approached, his face breaking into an unguarded smile at the sight of her. He strode to meet the wagon, reaching up to help Fiona down with strong, steady hands. "Welcome back," he said simply, his eyes warm as they met hers. Fiona found herself momentarily speechless, struck by how right it felt to be there. "Thank you for inviting me. Your ranch is beautiful in the daylight." "Norwood Ranch isn't much compared to some," Fletcher replied modestly, "but it's home." He offered his arm. "Would you like a tour before lunch? Consuela's been cooking since dawn." The next few hours passed in a delightful blur as Fletcher showed her around his domain, the barn with its fine horses, the corral where Miguel was training a spirited colt, the small orchard Fletcher had planted behind the house, and finally, the main house itself, which proved far more comfortable and well-appointed than Fiona had remembered. "You've built something wonderful here," she told him sincerely as they paused on the porch, looking out over the property. "It must have taken tremendous work and vision." Fletcher's gaze traveled over his land, pride evident in his expression. "It's been my life for 7 years now. Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself, how it's grown from nothing." "Not from nothing," Fiona corrected gently. "From your hard work and determination." He looked down at her, something profound and unreadable in his eyes. Before he could respond, Consuela called them to lunch, breaking the moment. The meal was a festive affair, with Consuela producing dish after delicious dish while regaling Fiona with stories about ranch life that had Fletcher alternating between embarrassment and reluctant amusement. Miguel joined them, his usual reticence giving way to animated conversation as the meal progressed. Fiona couldn't remember when she had last felt so genuinely welcome, so effortlessly included in a family circle, for that was what they were, she realized, not by blood but by choice and circumstance. After lunch, Fletcher suggested a ride to show her a particularly beautiful view from the hills above the ranch. Fiona hesitated, confessing that her riding experience was limited to sedate park paths in Boston. "You'll ride with me," Fletcher decided, his tone making it clear he wouldn't risk her safety on an unfamiliar horse. "Sargent can carry us both easily." The prospect of riding double with Fletcher sent a thrill of anticipation through Fiona. She changed into the split riding skirt Consuela lent her, slightly too large but serviceable, and met Fletcher at the corral where he waited with a magnificent chestnut gelding. "This is Sargent," Fletcher introduced, patting the horse's neck affectionately. "Been with me since Texas." Fletcher mounted first, then reached down to lift Fiona effortlessly before him. The intimacy of the position, her back pressed against his chest, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins, made Fiona acutely aware of every point of contact between them. As they rode into the hills at a gentle pace, Fletcher gradually relaxed behind her, one arm settling more comfortably around her waist. Fiona found herself leaning back slightly into his solid warmth, allowing herself to enjoy the closeness. "There was a time I thought I'd never feel this kind of peace again," Fletcher said suddenly, his voice quiet near her ear. "After the war, some wounds don't show on the outside." Fiona covered his hand with hers where it rested at her waist. "I understand. After Richard died, I thought the emptiness would never ease." "Has it?" he asked, the question holding depths beyond its simplicity. Fiona considered honestly before answering. "Yes, not all at once and not completely, but being here, starting fresh, meeting new people." She hesitated, then added softly, "Meeting you. It's helped me remember there can be joy again." Fletcher's arm tightened almost imperceptibly around her waist. "I've been alone a long time, got used to it, didn't think I needed anything or anyone else." His voice dropped lower. "Then I found you crying in that broken stagecoach and something changed." The simple honesty of his words touched Fiona deeply. She leaned back further into his embrace, tilting her head to look up at him. Fletcher's gaze met hers, open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I'm glad you found me," she whispered. For a breathless moment, Fiona thought he might kiss her there on horseback beneath the vast Arizona sky. Instead, Fletcher drew a deep breath and straightened slightly, gesturing toward a promontory ahead. "We're nearly there. The view's worth the ride." He was right. From the elevated vantage point, the landscape spread before them in breathtaking panorama, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the ranch buildings tiny in the middle distance, and the vast desert stretching to the horizon in every direction. Fletcher helped Fiona dismount, keeping his hands at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. They stood side by side, taking in the view, comfortable in shared silence. "I can see why you love it here," Fiona said eventually. "There's a wild beauty to it that seeps into your soul." Fletcher nodded, his gaze thoughtful as it swept the horizon. Took me a while to see it that way. At first, it was just empty space somewhere to disappear, to forget. He glanced down at her. Now I see possibilities. The way he said it, looking directly at her, made Fiona's heart race. What kind of possibilities? Fletcher turned to face her fully, reaching up to brush a strand of hair that had escaped her pins. A future beyond just survival, maybe. A shared future. Fiona's breath caught at the tentative hope in his eyes. Fletcher. I know it's too soon, he said quickly. We've barely known each other a month, but I haven't felt this way in, maybe ever. He took her hands in his expression earnest. I'm not asking for promises, Fiona, just possibility. Would you be open to seeing where this might lead? Joy welled up inside her, bright and unexpected. Yes, she answered simply. I would like that very much. Relief and happiness transformed Fletcher's features. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender, it brought tears to Fiona's eyes. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, becoming a promise of things they had both thought forever lost to them. When they finally broke apart, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. I've wanted to do that since I found you by that broken stagecoach. Fiona smiled, reaching up to touch his face. I'm glad you waited until I wasn't crying. His laugh, a full, rich sound she'd never heard from him before, echoed across the hillside. I do have some sense of timing. They lingered on the hilltop, talking, sharing occasional soft kisses, and simply enjoying the connection that had grown between them against all odds. By the time they returned to the ranch, something fundamental had shifted, a commitment unspoken but real. A path forward they would navigate together. Over the weeks that followed, their relationship blossomed. Fletcher began visiting Superior more frequently, ostensibly for supplies or business with the blacksmith, but always finding time to see Fiona. She, in turn, spent several more Saturdays at the ranch, gradually becoming as comfortable there as in her own quarters in town. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Superior was too small for courtships to proceed unobserved. But rather than disapproval, Fiona found most people responded with approval or even delight. Fletcher, it seemed, had earned the community's respect over the years through his integrity and reliability, even if he had never fully integrated into town life. You're good for him, Frank Tillman told Fiona one day as she selected supplies at the mercantile. Never seen Fletcher Norwood smile so much in all the years I've known him. Mrs. Hollister was even more direct. When's that handsome rancher of yours going to make an honest proposal, dear? A man doesn't ride 30 miles round trip every week just to discuss the weather. Fiona had blushed and demurred, but the woman's words stayed with her. Would Fletcher propose? Did she want him to? The answer, she realized with startling clarity, was yes. Despite the relatively short time they had known each other, Fiona had never felt more certain about anything in her life. As summer turned to autumn, and the desert landscape transformed with subtle shifts of color, Fletcher invited Fiona to the ranch for a special dinner. To celebrate the successful end of Roundup, he explained, though something in his manner suggested more significance than the occasion warranted. Fiona arrived to find the ranch house transformed. Fletcher had clearly gone to extraordinary lengths. The table set with the good china Consuela had mentioned was rarely used, candles glowing throughout the main room, even a vase of late-blooming wildflowers as a centerpiece. The meal was Fletcher's favorite beef roast, prepared to perfection by Consuela, who served it with obvious pride before tactfully withdrawing with Miguel to their cottage, leaving Fletcher and Fiona alone. As they finished the apple pie Fiona had brought from town, Fletcher grew uncharacteristically quiet, a tension about him that she had not seen before. "Is something wrong?" she asked gently, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Fletcher shook his head, turning his palm up to grasp her fingers. "Nothing's wrong. Just finding my courage." Before Fiona could question this cryptic statement, he rose and moved around the table to kneel beside her chair. Her breath caught as he took both her hands in his. "Fiona Valmont," he began, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes, "I never expected to find love again. Thought that part of life was closed to me. Then your stagecoach broke down on my land and everything changed." He swallowed hard. "I love you. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Tears of joy welled in Fiona's eyes. "Oh, Fletcher, I know it hasn't been long," he continued, "and I'm not the easiest man to know. I carry scars from the war that may never fully heal. The ranch is remote, far from the town life you've built. But I promise to love you every day of my life, to work beside you in creating something beautiful here." Fiona stopped his words with a finger to his lips, her heart overflowing. "Yes, Fletcher Norwood. Yes, I will marry you." The joy that illuminated his face was answer enough, but Fletcher sealed the promise by rising to his feet and drawing her into his arms for a kiss that spoke of devotion, passion, and the future they would share. "I have something for you," he said when they finally parted. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "It's not fancy or new, but it has history." Inside was a delicate gold ring with a small pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds, elegant in its simplicity. "It was my mother's," Fletcher explained softly. "My father gave it to her when they became engaged in 1831. I've carried it with me all these years, never thinking I'd have reason to give it to anyone." The significance of the gesture, this intensely private man sharing not just the ring, but the family connection it represented, brought fresh tears to Fiona's eyes. "It's beautiful, Fletcher. I'll treasure it always." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit that seemed somehow fated, Fiona felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. The broken stagecoach that had once seemed a disaster had led her exactly where she needed to be. "The journey ends here if you want," Fletcher said softly, echoing his words from their first meeting as he held her close. "Or perhaps it's only just beginning." Fiona smiled up at the man who had rescued her in more ways than one. "I think I prefer to see it as a beginning." The weeks that followed passed in a whirlwind of preparations and decisions. Fletcher suggested a Christmas wedding, giving them time to make necessary arrangements while not delaying unnecessarily. Fiona agreed readily, finding herself unexpectedly eager to begin their life together. The question of where they would live after marriage required more discussion. Fiona loved her teaching and had built meaningful connections with her students. Fletcher's life was inextricably bound to his ranch. After much consideration, they reached a compromise that satisfied them both. Fiona would finish the school year in Superior, with Fletcher expanding the small cabin near town that he sometimes used when business kept him overnight. Once summer arrived, they would make the ranch their permanent home, with Fiona potentially teaching any children from neighboring ranches who needed education. News of their engagement spread quickly through Superior, generating a wave of goodwill and excitement that surprised them both. The Ladies' Aid Society immediately began planning a wedding quilt. Frank Tillman offered the use of his new freight wagon to transport Fiona's belongings to the ranch after the ceremony. Even the town's children expressed their approval, though several of Fiona's students worried openly about losing their teacher. "You'll still be our teacher until summer," Fiona reassured them, "and I'll help the town council find someone wonderful to replace me." As the wedding day approached, Fletcher threw himself into renovating the ranch house, adding a proper study for Fiona where she could continue her intellectual pursuits and perhaps tutor neighboring children. Consuela supervised a thorough cleaning of every corner, while Miguel constructed a beautiful bookshelf as a wedding gift, designed specifically to hold Fiona's beloved collection of literature and poetry. The morning of December 23, 1875, dawned clear and crisp, unusually cold for Arizona, but bright with winter sunshine that seemed to Fiona a blessing on their union. The wedding would take place in Superior's small church, followed by a reception at the hotel dining room, which the town council had insisted on providing as a gift to their beloved schoolteacher. In the small back room of the church, Fiona stood before a borrowed mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. She wore a new dress of ivory silk, an extravagance Fletcher had insisted upon despite her protests that her best blue dress would suffice. Mrs. Hollister had arranged her hair in an elegant style adorned with small white flowers, and around her neck hung a delicate gold locket, another gift from Fletcher, containing miniature portraits of both their mothers. "You look beautiful, my dear," said Mrs. Hollister, dabbing at her eyes. "Your Fletcher won't know what hit him." A knock at the door announced Frank Tillman, who had offered to escort Fiona down the aisle in the absence of her own father. "Ready, Miss Valmont?" he asked with a warm smile. "For the last time we'll call you that." Fiona took a deep breath, her heart full. "More ready than I've ever been for anything." The church was filled to capacity. It seemed the entire population of Superior had turned out for the occasion. As the simple piano music began, and Fiona stepped into the aisle on Frank's arm, her eyes sought and found Fletcher standing before the altar. The sight of him waiting for her, tall and proud in a new black suit, his face transformed by an expression of such naked adoration it took her breath away, brought tears to Fiona's eyes. This man, who had found her crying beside a broken stagecoach and offered her choice when she felt she had none, was about to become her husband. Each step toward him felt like coming home. The ceremony itself passed in something of a blur, traditional vows spoken with quiet intensity, rings exchanged with hands that trembled slightly from emotion rather than nervousness, and finally, the minister's pronouncement that they were husband and wife. When Fletcher kissed her before the assembled townspeople, Fiona felt a surge of joy so pure it seemed to illuminate her from within. They had both traveled long, difficult roads to reach this moment, paths marked by loss and struggle, yet ultimately leading to each other. The celebration afterward was everything a frontier town could offer: abundant food, spirited music from local musicians, and genuine goodwill from people who had come to care deeply for both bride and groom. Fletcher, usually so reserved in public, surprised everyone by leading Fiona onto the dance floor for the first waltz, moving with unexpected grace for such a tall man. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" Fiona asked in delighted surprise as he guided her through the steps. A rare smile lit his features. Virginia society had its advantages. Some things you don't forget, even after years of only dancing with tumbleweeds. As the celebration continued around them, Fletcher eventually drew Fiona outside for a moment of quiet beneath the star-filled desert sky. "Happy, Mrs. Norwood?" he asked softly, his arms encircling her waist. The new name sent a thrill through Fiona. "Completely, Mr. Norwood." She reached up to touch his face, still somewhat amazed that this remarkable man was now her husband. "If that stagecoach hadn't broken down, I would have found you anyway," Fletcher finished with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be." Later that night, as they drove by moonlight to the ranch that would become their shared home, Fiona nestled against Fletcher's side in the wagon, content in a way she had never thought possible again after losing Richard. "The journey ends here," she murmured, echoing his words from their first meeting. Fletcher's arm tightened around her shoulders. "No, my love, our journey is just beginning." And indeed it was. The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, but also joys beyond measure. The following spring brought their first child, a son they named William after Fletcher's father. 2 years later, a daughter followed, whom they called Eleanor after Fiona's mother. Eventually, their family would grow to include 4 children, each with their own mixture of Fletcher's quiet strength and Fiona's passionate intelligence. Fiona did indeed establish a school at the ranch, initially teaching only their own children, but eventually welcoming students from neighboring properties. Her reputation as an excellent educator spread, bringing families from surprising distances to settle nearby. Knowing their children would receive quality education, Fletcher's ranch prospered and expanded, becoming one of the territory's most successful operations. The skills he had developed during the war, strategic thinking, leadership, determination in the face of adversity, served him well in building his legacy. Yet he remained the same fundamentally decent man who had once stopped to help a crying woman beside a broken stagecoach, always ready to assist neighbors in need or offer second chances to those society had discarded. Through it all, their love deepened and strengthened, weathering occasional disagreements and shared sorrows with the same steady commitment that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. They faced each challenge together, drawing strength from each other and the life they had built. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and friends who had become family, Fletcher took Fiona aside to present her with a special gift, a small, exquisitely crafted model of a broken stagecoach, carved from wood by his own hands. "To remember where we started," he explained, his eyes still holding the same love they had shown on their wedding day, though now framed by silver hair and lines earned through years of Arizona suns. Fiona's fingers traced the miniature broken wheel, her heart full. "As if I could ever forget." "It was the luckiest breakdown in history." Fletcher chuckled, the sound still capable of sending warmth through her after all their years together. "I think about it sometimes how different our lives might have been if you'd continued to Superior that day, if I hadn't happened to ride that way." "I don't believe it was chance," Fiona replied, reaching up to touch his face, now weathered but still handsome to her eyes. "I think some journeys are meant to end exactly where they do, so that something greater can begin." As the celebration continued around them, Fletcher drew her into a familiar embrace, his arms still strong and secure after a quarter-century together. "You were right that day when you said it was a beginning rather than an ending." Fiona smiled up at the man who had transformed her broken journey into the greatest adventure of her life. "The best beginning I could have imagined." Under the vast Arizona sky, with the ranch they had built together spread around them, and the family they had created gathered near, Fletcher and Fiona Norwood stood wrapped in each other's arms, living proof that sometimes the most beautiful destinations can only be reached when the planned journey ends unexpectedly, making way for a far greater adventure than either could have envisioned alone.